help women save lives and peacefully end abortion where you live.
I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired.
You were serious about that?
Be inspired to change hearts and minds by joining over 1 million volunteers taking part in the global movement happening in your neighborhood.
She says, pray that I can get through this abortion. And I said, oh, no. So she went ahead and went into the abortion clinic. When she just came out, she told us, I'm not going to get the abortion. We just had a baby saved. We had a baby saved in Memphis today. Praise the Lord.
This is the 40 Days for Life podcast with your host, Sean Carney.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the 40 Days for Life podcast. I am Sean Carney, the president of 40 Days for Life, and your host for this podcast, which is dedicated to helping you end abortion where you live. And rumor has it, there is an election coming up in the United States of America, and today we will talk about politically botching abortion. There is a rumor that being pro-life is politically harmful. So today we will discuss and explore, is that true? And how can the abortion issue help not just defend life, but even win elections? And so with the election coming up, we will cover this. Please send all compliments and hate mail, which we are sure to get, to podcast at 40daysforlife.com. As it's political season, we're all supposed to hate each other and send hate mail. So please send that to podcast at 40daysforlife.com. If you disagree with something we say or we botch something, and you can educate us on that. Somebody who's never botched anything in his life ever before is my co-host, Mr. Steve Carlin.
Ever. Never happened. Glad to be here, Sean.
Undefeated.
Yes.
Although you did botch something, and we can show the video right now that I just wanted to leave out, but now we'll include it. Many politicians are botching abortion like you dropped the home run ball on ESPN in 2018.
Oh. Here we go. There we go. Bring out Carlin. Here he is. This is never going to get old. Never change. Oh, the ending is the same.
You really know how to cut to the core of me, Sean.
That is a lot of cheese. Okay, yeah. Somebody also... Can we quote Anchorman on the podcast? I don't know if that's appropriate. Somebody who's never seen Anchorman.
I have seen Anchorman.
Shh.
Baxter, you know I don't speak Spanish.
Yeah. Why don't we just go there? So I was like married and had kids, and my younger brother-in-laws were watching. I was like, this is the dumbest thing ever. So I quit watching it. And then I go back, I don't know, 5-10 years later, and I'm like, this is pretty funny. And so
I'm offended, Sean, that you thought I never watched Anchorman.
I thought that you probably had it memorized. I just didn't want the listeners and the viewers to know that, because they may be like, I thought Ramona was a good person.
We thought she was the sane one out of the bunch.
We thought she was the sane one.
We needed to maintain some sense of decorum on the 40 Days for Life podcast.
That's fair. I've never seen Anchorman.
One of the things, Anchorman to me is in a little bit of the Seinfeld realm, where like I like when you make fun of how self-absorbed we are, and I look good. I look real good. Everybody come over and see how good I look. Like I love all that stuff. Okay, that was unintentional. So we are going to talk about politics and abortion, and we need a little bit of a disclaimer, because we're going to address some things from the 50,000-foot viewpoint, because mainly Trump has said a lot of stuff, some very good, some very dumb, all over the board, and he may have done more of that by the time this comes out. Okay, so that's our little disclaimer of what we discuss. So if he says something crazy and we don't address it, whether it's a good crazy or bad crazy, forgive us because we're recording this a couple of weeks before it comes out. That's on the Trump side. I think that's the Republican side. Republicans are the ones botching abortion, so we're definitely going to hammer away at them today. But the Democrats aren't really botching abortion because there's a lot of consistency in a post-Roe world, which is we want no regulations on abortion. We want abortion through 40 weeks. We want infanticide. We want to remove the requirement for that a doctor actually have to do the abortion. We want to remove any restriction on mailing abortion pills wherever we want, and we want to basically deregulate abortion pills altogether, which we saw when with their announcement last year, and then CVS and Walgreens getting in line and distributing abortions. So it's very unique for any issue where you have one side that is totally clear on what they believe and another side that's very inconsistent on what they believe. We recently did the immigration podcast, and maybe immigration a little bit, but
nobody's actually talking policy on immigration. It's just sort of demagoguing and talking points. I think guns would maybe be the comparison.
That's a good example because there's a lot of Democrats that aren't like, we don't want to take away your guns. I guess that's a good one because I guess most Republicans are just all in line with the Second Amendment. I mean, are there anti-gun Republicans? I don't know. You would have a better idea.
There's some, but this is an issue. It's always fascinating to me. They never get any traction. If you look at just sort of the slate of conservative policy agenda items, their track record is probably most successful on gun rights, I would say.
I would too. It's really funny. They never lose on that. Is that because of Republicans or is that because of the NRA? The NRA is extremely powerful and influential, and their whole philosophy is we're not giving an inch.
Yeah, and they're pretty in decline, but I think they kind of have set the tone that you don't. It's in some ways it's like the Democrats supporting third trimester abortion. They're just, like you said, not going to give an inch, and so they've won consistently on that. And I think there's also some demographic issues there. I can think of my grandfather. One of my grandfathers was like a long time like Union Democrat voter, but toward the end of his life, he was voting Republican because he was a deer hunter.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to get into some a stat really quick to get into the abortions on a political loser. First off, we've seen bad Republicans who botch abortion, who no one knows what they're talking about, who keep switching their position. They lost in 2022. 2022 is kind of the reference point. Kansas, the referendum. Ohio, which is a huge loss. It was a huge loss. But the strong pro-life Republicans in 2022 won. Greg Abbott here in Texas, who had a heartbeat bill. DeSantis, obviously, what he wouldn't buy 22% in Florida?
19.
Okay. And then Kemp in Georgia won. And he had a heartbeat bill.
You can even add DeWine in Ohio, and he's been kind of a loser on some of the gender stuff and disappointing on some of those issues, but he signed a heartbeat bill in Ohio and won handily.
Yeah. So, and the heartbeat bill is like the worst thing in the world, according to the left. I mean, even Trump has criticized the heartbeat bill, which was really stupid. But, they won. They won handedly. And I saw an interesting poll in late September, and I was shocked because the narrative that all the listeners and everybody thinks is women hate Donald Trump. He needs to compromise suburban women. We really talk down to suburban women in this country. It was just like, well, they're just like these idiots that are like, well, you got to vote for Kamala. She's a woman. And you're like, what? So Trump had an 11% deficit with women in 2016. Okay. So Hillary won women by 11%. In 2020, Biden won women by 11%. And in 2024, post-Roe, he is polling losing women by 11%.
So there's no change from 2016 to 2020 to now.
Shocking. It's shocking. And we've discussed before, you see other demographics, the Latino vote, 28% in 2016, a record for a Republican, 2016. Then the Latino vote in 2020 went up to 32%. And they're estimating that in 2024, with the border mess and all of that, it's going to go as high as 37% of the Latino vote. But the women vote, which is what they're banking on, the Democrats, because women love abortion and Trump is an evil man who overturned Roe, it hasn't moved the needle.
So how did he lose in 2020? Well, that's a loaded question. How?
Oh,
I'm not looking to go down that.
Steve, they stole the election and you were part of it. You live in Wisconsin. You're a very bad person.
If he's done better among racial minority voters and he hasn't declined from 2016 to 2020 among women, is it just simply that there are more, like volume of women turnout was higher and so that 11% had a greater magnitude, or where
turnout was everything in 2020. Yeah. I mean, everybody turned out, basically COVID and mail-in ballots and all of that, which I think Trump has just gotten so distracted with he's still on the election was rigged thing, and like no one wants to hear about that. Even people that firmly believe the election was totally stolen, they don't want to hear about it in 2024. And he just, anyways, can't.
I was going to say even the dead turned out in 2020.
Ramona's dog voted.
My grandmother showed up and voted for Biden.
My dog
Never
didn't
would've
get to
happened
vote.
when she was alive.
May not get to vote this election. He may be eaten for dinner.
Oh no.
They're eating the cats. They're eating the dogs. I was watching that debate. I know we've criticized him for the debate. I thought he was horrible in the debate. And even with like ABC, I get it. We've discussed this before, but it's like, yes, ABC is against you. Like that doesn't mean you have to start talking about people eating cats. Like you just lose everybody. So I get cracked up at the like Trumper, the cult people, right? And they go on and their goal is to like prove that he was right. And you're like, this is a loser topic. Like there's like real things going on. You said, this is like serious issues going on. And this was such a rabbit trail. Then you have people that were like, but we have video of somebody skinning a cat. And you're like, this is now like, it's like October and we're talking about the cat thing still and whether a Haitian ate a cat or a dog. And anyways.
What a time to be alive.
So, yeah, what a time to be alive. Okay. What is lost in all of this is the overturning of Roe and the political ramifications, and we'll know a lot more, right, in 2024. But everybody's upset that it got harder before it got easier. But emancipation was a disaster. Reconstruction was a total mess after the emancipation. That doesn't mean it was the wrong thing to do. It was the right thing to do. What do you think? We're just going to wake up the next day and everything be normal?
Mm-hmm.
If you look at America in the 1860s or 1870s, it looks kind of like one of these third world fallen states. Like America is a failure at that point, right? Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address talked about like, can the experiment long endure? And it looked like America was over at that point. Like we have the benefit of hindsight 150, 160 years later where we can look back and be like, yeah, it was a dark moment in our history, but we triumphed and democracy overcame and here we are, better and stronger. But at the time, that was not guaranteed by any means.
But we had a great leader. I mean, Abraham Lincoln was genius in beginning already to court Robert E. Lee, basically saying, I have to have you for Reconstruction to like rebuild the South, right? And of course, a lot of people up north, and I can understand why, wanted to hang him, for treason. Which, by the way, recently they reinstated his citizenship.
Oh,
I don't know if you knew that. Yeah, he had his citizenship stripped. He's been dead for a long time, but they reinstated it. But that was under Biden.
Interesting.
Biden's a Confederate. Dangerous. I knew it all along. But that was very smart, and Reconstruction was a mess, and you basically had a lot of people who sounded very reasonable, who sounded very responsible, saying, okay, this is a little out of control. Maybe we can make a compromise. Maybe you could be a slave from 18 to 30. That's better than your whole life. Like, take the deal. That's great. You're 30. 12 years as a slave on a plantation. You can do whatever you want. And and thank God, that just never worked. But the inconsistency of slave state and free state is exactly what we have now.
Mm-hmm.
And it got messy too. I mean, Lincoln, obviously strong leader, but he was replaced by Andrew Johnson, and that was complete chaos and turmoil. I mean, he got impeached. Up until Clinton, he was the only American president that had ever been impeached. Now we're impeaching presidents as much as people are trying to assassinate presidents, apparently. But it was chaos. And you made the point, I didn't think of this after Roe was overturned, but you made the point that there were people who were like, yeah, this is a mistake. We should just go back to the way things were. And now we hear some of these wimpy Republicans saying the same line about abortion. Thanks be to God, I don't think any of the abolitionists ever wavered on whether it was the right thing to free the slaves. Messy. I mean, we're still dealing with the fallout all these years later. Look at 2020. Look at the George Floyd stuff. We're still bearing the scars of slavery, and yet nobody in their right mind would say, let's go back to that. And I think that if we take a long enough timeline on the abortion issue, it'll only be a matter of time before everybody agrees and understands that overturning Roe was good and, in fact, necessary.
The only thing that they want to go back to is the mentality that our country is fundamentally evil and nothing's changed as far as the race part.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're as racist today as we were back then, which is just not true and a total insult to the people who are actually enslaved in this country. But it was the right thing to do to overturn Roe v. Wade, and it's only the second time, Dred Scott dehumanized blacks and Roe dehumanized the unborn. And by the way, we didn't vote on either one of them. It was the Supreme Court. I mean, the Supreme Court's history is basically their greatest victories are correcting their greatest errors. But I just think that, and we're going to find out in a few weeks, but the 11% stat that I showed you, because the whole thing is he is just going to absolutely lose all women. And it points to what we know, which is they're ignored. But Ramona, you are not the only woman that is pro-life.
Imagine that.
There are others.
Really? I'm not alone.
You're not.
I can't believe it.
And it's kind of like they don't factor that in. What about the women that wanted Roe overturned?
Right. Well, and I was going to ask too, when you talk about some Republicans who kind of have some regrets after the fact, I wonder how much of that is because they don't know how to talk about it outside of just using it as their political tool, right? So how much of it, how many of them are actually convicted on the issue? So I think that's probably plays a little bit of a part in it. Like, where's the conviction? Is it really that you are pro-life, or in that you were convicted on this issue, or that you've always just used it as a political tool?
They've always used it as a political tool. I think on most issues. I mean, you do get politicians that basically people get involved in politics usually for like one or two issues, and they're like, yeah, they want to build new roads, but they don't really care about that. They care about veterans or whatever it is that got them into it. I don't even mind that. Mm-hmm. If you're conviction, you have a lot going on. You have to speak on all the different issues, and people are constantly bombarding you. I mean, we harp on them, and they deserve it, but like being in Congress, especially these days, is awful. I mean, you got to run every 2 years. You get people just pounding you at every direction. Now, with the internet and social media, you just can't, take a vacation with your kids or go do anything. You're just monitored. And also, we've turned these people into celebrities, and that didn't used to be the case. But the level of conviction, you don't even need that. They just need to know it could help them win on either side. Because I don't think a lot of people on the Democratic Party want abortion at 40 weeks, but they think that it can get them elected, which is the worst, right? But that's what politicians do. Mm-hmm. It's they insult human dignity through their compromise. And I think that a lot of Republicans probably think we should have abortion up until 15 or 20 weeks. They're probably basically against late-term abortion, but they don't see how they can win with it. And one thing that they never do that the left does a very, very good job at when it comes to abortion is stories.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I remember back, a story we've talked about many times on this podcast is when my alma mater, the University of Wisconsin, was trying to do late-term abortions on campus. And they had a big public board meeting about whether to proceed with this plan after it was exposed. And pro-lifers came in and they provided statistics and evidence and science. And it seemed like a very logical, airtight case that doing these abortions would be bad for the community, bad for babies, bad for moms, bad for the hospital itself. And then the abortion supporters had their turn at the podium, and they just came in and told these sob stories, heartbreaking, tearjerkers, true, not true, who even knows, but they told stories and carried the day. And we're seeing the same thing right now, I think.
And we have the stories.
We do.
We have a million of them. And, you know, and we've given talking points. We've done everything that, you know, anybody's asked us to do. But it's absolutely crazy that to think that abortion, number one, it's not the number one issue. And we've said before, Kamala Harris is running a very big risk in running on the culture war, which is Trump's evil and I'm going to restore Roe v. Wade. And most Americans don't like the culture war being at the top of the ticket, for better, for worse. Us as like Christians and Catholics were like, they don't care about marriage, and they really don't. It's not an issue, and most Americans don't, actually. And that was really a problem. It comes down to the economy. It comes down to healthcare. It comes down to immigration. It comes down to the military. But I lost my track of thought. But her propping up abortion, which is a negative and depressing for most people, even those who support it. I mean, it's not a. I mean, Obama ran on hope and change in the future, and George W. Bush ran on national security and protecting America, and our best days are ahead of us. And Ronald Reagan was certainly like the most optimistic campaigner. Clinton was very, you know, he ran on change and all of that. And it's always a positive. Only Trump and Biden have run campaigns where the other guy's the devil and I'll fix it. Mm-hmm. So Hillary's awful, our country's awful, Obama's awful, I'll fix it. And then Biden comes along and says he's a tyrant, he's crazy, I'll fix it. That's the only two examples in recent history. And she's running on not the future or anything. She's running on joy and abortion, which is a tough thing, unless you're at 40 Days for Life, because we joyfully approach the, you know. But that's just not. We'll see. Maybe it'll work. Maybe she'll win in a landslide, and everybody just is clamoring for abortion. But even among Democrats, it's the third most important issue.
I think their takeaway from all of these referenda that they've won if we've lost has been that abortion will mobilize people. And so why not put their eggs in the basket? They can't do that on foreign policy. They can't do it on the economy. They can't do it on inflation. They think they've got lightning in a bottle here on this abortion issue.
But they also take advantage of the fact that the public is not educated. So, you know, a lot of these people, I mean, we saw her in the debate just outright lie on issues of abortion, right?
Yeah, well, she denied that they go until 40 weeks, that Roe goes until 40 weeks. Trump actually pointed that out in the Biden debate. He got two good stats out. He got that they allow it to 40 weeks, and that, he described how barbaric late-term abortion is. Anytime you can do that with millions of people watching, I'm all for it. I don't care what politician it is. And number two, that Roe did allow abortion through all 40 weeks. And Biden's like, well, he was obviously out of it in that debate. But she just straight up denied that. Mm-hmm. And ABC denied it. But I don't think that matters because he was able to get it out. I'm interested. Let's say Trump came out tomorrow because everybody's like he's compromised on abortion, which I think Donald Trump, most of his life, he was pro-choice. He believes in rape exceptions, which is basically what 92% of the population believes in that. All politicians believe in that. And he is against the heartbeat bills, which I think was a mistake. And then he said he was going to vote against the Florida thing. He was, for it, now against it. And he's on the right pro-life track, but he's all over the map. And But his record obviously is the best we ever have, and now he seems kind of lost, and his advisors have been terrible, and he's been terrible. He's still culpable for saying all this stuff. But if Trump just came out and said, I'm against abortion after 25 weeks, I don't think that wins him any votes.
No, not at all. And we've got such a focus on Trump right now. Trump is kind of a one-off. Like, I don't know what happens after Trump, but at most he's got 4 more years, and then we'll get other Republicans. I get a little bit more worried about these other Republicans, and where I think, we have failed. I don't think pro-life groups like 40 Days for Life have failed, but I think the politicians have failed to come up with a coherent response to the absurd notion that these abortion bans are preventing women from getting miscarriage care, and these abortion bans are how many? It blows my mind when you see all these stories. Meet the women who were denied a life-saving abortion. Well, how can I meet them? They died if they didn't have the abortion. Nobody's asking that question. Nobody's pointing it out. Nobody's standing up in a debate and saying, actually, this bill does not prohibit miscarriage care. Actually, these women did not die, and because you see them in the ad. It's kind of chaos, and I think they seem to be afraid to engage on that issue. I don't know if it's because we eat, breathe, sleep, drink abortion and pro-life and all of this stuff on a daily basis, and the politicians are thinking about fiscal policy. I don't know, but they're clearly not equipped to take it on. Otherwise, I would assume that they would be.
But going back to how Trump has botched it, also, the guy brags about everything else and takes credit for everything else, and yet, he finally came around. I heard him say, but I'm proud of the Supreme Court. I appointed those 3 judges. I released my list. I did what I said. They did overturn Roe v. Wade. It was bad law. Many constitutional lawyers. He said that a lot, and so that's a good thing. But getting roped into this stupid IVF stuff, and now I'm going to pay for IVF. We're going to do federally funded IVF, which most people are for IVF, right? The Catholic Church teaches against it. We're against it. We've done podcasts on it. We've written books on it and all that stuff, right? But politically, everybody's for IVF, and he's always been for IVF, and they used that Alabama ban that lasted a week against him, and he fell for the bait, which I know is his sacred tradition, is falling for the bait. But then I'm like, even if you are for IVF, you don't want the federal government paying for it. IVF's expensive. It's fiscally irresponsible. And in 2016 he ran as I'm not a politician, and he's not. And now that's showing, and I think it's hurting him. Mm-hmm. I think he's being a bad politician in the real sense of the word, of you're just saying stuff that is all over the map.
I agree.
Yeah, I don't understand what he's up to.
That's the fear of abortion. If I fund IVF, I'm less pro-life, and it's so stupid.
He doesn't do it about anything else, though.
I know.
One area where he kind of, and to his credit, he'll respond to the pushback he gets from pro-lifers too. But there's not a coherent message there, and that makes it really difficult when you've got these compelling tearjerker ads, dishonest as can be. I was denied a life-saving abortion. We just have not seen an answer for that in the political sphere. We've been doing it at 40 Days for Life. I mean, we have the chapter on what to say when, too. Where are all the dead women? They don't exist. We've got multiple chapters about rape and incest. In the magazine, we're talking to people like Christy Hoferber, whose mother conceived her in incest. And where is a politician that is willing to stand up and say, it sounds compassionate to support rape in case of incest, but I think Christy should be the face of the pro-life movement right now. Her mother was subjected to more than 20 years of abuse because her father used abortion as a tool to cover up his sexual assault of his own daughter. Why are we not hearing these stories?
But politicians are never going to do that because they all support abortion for rape and incest.
Do you think they do, in their hearts, do you think this is a principled position, or do you think they've been sold that they have to because it's the pathway to electoral success? To me, this is the biggest fool's gold in the world. I think everybody's accepting. You never hear anyone say, well, I actually think that these women should have abortions. It's always well, we got to save as many as we can, and we'll work our way there. I think that they feel like these exceptions are simply a necessary evil to get elected. And if we could see a politician stand up and make the honest case for life and say, yes, and here's why I'm opposed to abortion, even in these cases of rape and incest, let me introduce you to my friend Christy and her mother. I don't know. I think that'd be a hard case.
That's why I was saying they lack conviction. If they had that conviction, they could argue those cases.
He's
right?
saying they're convicted, but they don't think that they can get elected.
On the convictions.
Right. I'm saying
they're playing politics with
I don't think they're
on
convicted.
conviction. Yeah.
I think most Republicans support abortion in general, but not.
That's my theory.
But it's me too. Like, especially the rape. I think that they would hear Christie and tearjerker, and they'd be like, rape victims should have access to abortion. Like, it's great that you chose, but that is so into the weeds, though. I mean, why can't they, when you're talking about talking points, because you get the 5 seconds, right? And it's, Roe was a disgrace. It put us in a category up to 40 weeks with North Korea and China. I don't believe in that. I don't believe that you should go in the 9th month, and he did a great job with that, and rip the baby out and kill the baby. And, proud of the Supreme Court for correcting their error that we didn't vote on on dated science. And I'm very proud of these states where the birth rate is going up and where they're supporting single moms with bipartisan legislation, and talk about North Carolina and Texas and Tennessee and all these places that help single moms. It's just a positive thing. And then it's over. Like, if they're politicians and they're like, look, I got 10 seconds. Like, what do I say? They don't have time for...
But the abortion industry has gone deep into the weeds. That's how they're winning. They're airing these ads that nobody can understand. Like, and because of the ectopic pregnancy, and people, I don't know what ectopic pregnancy is, but this sounds scary, so I'm going to go for it. I would love to see an ad. I think you could do it in 10 seconds. I think it'd be like, abortion enabled this sick man to rape his own daughter for 20 years.
All right, that's good. Yeah, when you word it like that, that's really good. But I agree with you on that point. But they lack the confidence or willingness to do that, and I think that there's just a lot of positives. I think that the pregnancy centers don't get enough shout outs, that there's, they outnumber abortion providers 5-1, and that, you say America wants abortion. No, they don't. There've been, we hear about Ohio, we hear about Kansas, but 25 states have passed either abortion bans or highly regulated abortion. And you just look at those states and say that they're enslaving women. It's total nonsense.
This is where we need to go on offense, though, because if you look at these referenda, the campaigns against them are all defense. The talking points are all too extreme. It's too extreme. It's too extreme. And I think that the voters are looking at it and they're saying, well, you want to talk too extreme? Let's talk about these women who are denied miscarriage care. And the debate's over at that point. Mm-hmm. I think we need to go on offense. And even if it requires going into the weeds a little bit, I think there are ways that we can be articulate about it, get to the point quickly, and make the case. Like, this too extreme thing, it's on our heels. We're allowing them to shame us for being pro-life, and I think it's time we put some of the stigma on abortion on the abortion supporters, and nobody's doing that in the political realm.
I do think that is a point, that they think miscarriage is abortion. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's so...
And people are falling for it.
Oh, yeah.
That's what's frustrating to me, is when I see people falling for that. I see it all the time in social media, and whether it's, like a local news posting about, a story, and then people are they'll come out and they'll comment in droves that they believe that this is abortion, that they believe that these women are not getting quote unquote abortion care. And it just drives me absolutely bonkers, because you can't respond to all of these people, right? And it's like we need someone who's capable of being able to rebuttal that on a national level, so that we can, because Kamala, stood there and she was able to say these lies, and Trump didn't say anything. He didn't have anything as a response to it.
And he's not equipped to say it.
No, he's not equipped.
I don't think he thought about abortion at all. And he was for it, and then he was personally against it.
But he should have known that she was going to come out.
This is why the episode is called Politically Botching
Absolutely.
Oh, no. he's the one botching it the most who's still in office. I mean, I didn't think Dr. Oz was going to, win in Pennsylvania, and all of that. So there were a lot of bad candidates in 2022. But when you talk about the marketing of it and them pushing rape, they've also pushed Ohio and Kansas. Americans want abortion. Well, if that were the case, there would have been 48 or 47 trigger laws protecting abortion with the overturning of Roe. And I still think they don't give enough credit to that. They don't give credit to. They certainly don't highlight the workers. I think the workers are very powerful. I think the former doctors are very powerful, and just those stories. But okay, I'm going to get into. So it's a political loser. Give it time, and you always make the point. There's always aggression towards change.
Yeah, there's always aggression towards change. We talk about it as Americans, like we always talk about wanting change. We want change. We crave change. Obama won the election on hope and change. And the fact of the matter is Americans don't want change. Americans want things to stay the same. Americans are very comfortable and confident in a status quo. And we've got some polling that backs this up. If you go back to October of 2020, pro-choice Americans outnumbered pro-life Americans by 2%. So it's almost 50-50. 4 months later, pro-choicers outnumbered pro-lifers by 17%. What happened? George W. Bush ran as a pro-lifer, was elected as a pro-lifer, and took office, and there's this kind of like, whoa, okay, we don't want him changing anything now.
He's going to take away our right to abortion.
Yeah. Flash forward 8 more years, May of 2008, pro-choicers outnumbered pro-lifers by 6%. That fall, we saw Obama elected, and by May, so we're talking a year later, the margin swung 15 points in the pro-life direction. Pro-lifers, for the first time ever in the history of the Gallup poll, outnumbered pro-choicers. So you see a backlash.
I think because he and Bush, if I can stop you there, they both emphasized their abortion positions heavily. Whereas Clinton was like, I don't like abortion. I want it to be safe, legal, and rare. And that was it. In 92, it just wasn't a thing. But Obama was the first, to me, big radical pro-abortion candidate. Clinton was obviously super pro-abortion, but not as a candidate. And Obama was. So that swing, that's the first time ever in a Gallup poll that pro-lifers.
Yeah. So the question is, do we have millions upon millions of Americans routinely changing their minds about abortion? I don't really think so. I think this is just, we don't want things to get too crazy here. Americans were dramatically opposed to Obamacare when it was put in office when it was put into effect. And then when Republicans took power and talked about overturning Obamacare, reversing it, Americans were opposed to reversing it as well. They just don't really want things to change because they're afraid of change.
And that's a big jump, 15%.
Yeah, massive.
Huge
It's
swing.
massive. And I wonder what influenced that, aside from, it makes me wonder, was it the pro-life generation? Because we're becoming more pro-life?
Millennials.
What influenced such a huge number between?
I think it was Obama came in saying he was going to repeal all abortion restrictions, and people are like, let's not get crazy here.
Yeah.
Let's not get crazy.
Well, I was
here.
working for Planned Parenthood at that time, so I just remember Barack was the king. They were, I started it in 2008.
You had to vote for Obama.
I did.
Because that would have been if you're like.
And
no,
if I go back to, 2008 Ramona, I'm like, I couldn't tell you why I was voting for him.
He was cool. And he was pro-abortion.
Obama. You know what I mean? I couldn't really give you a reason for.
But
his policies.
One of the biggest upsets ever, actually, is him beating Hillary. I mean, we forget because now he's the rock star of everything. But I mean, he had no experience. He was a community organizer, famously, and he took out the Clinton machine. It's pretty amazing.
Planned Parenthood loved him too because of Obamacare. They were losing money left and right because women were seeking alternatives.
Came later, though, because Hillary, her big thing was health care. You'll remember Obamacare was just sort of the successor to Hillary. I mean,
Hillary care.
When Clinton was in office, I mean, she was leading policy, which is kind of a wild thing. I don't know if I've ever seen a first lady leading on a policy item the way that Hillary Clinton did. But That's the thing. And these wild shifts in public opinion, we see them continue. If you go to May of 2021, we're basically at a 50-50 country. A year later, the leak comes out that the Supreme Court is going to overturn Roe v. Wade. We go from a 50-50 country, and we've got a 14-point shift in the pro-choice advantage. Flash forward another year, that's 16-point flip. That's cut in half. So I think all of this, the point here is just don't overreact to momentary shifts in polling or momentary shifts in what happens at the ballot box. As Professor Michael New always tells us, you have to look at the long trends, decades-long trends. And the overturning of Roe v. Wade is an inflection point in policy, and we're going to see public opinion catch up to it as hopefully sooner rather than later, women realize, actually, we're not being denied miscarriage care. Actually, I don't know a single person who has died because they couldn't get an abortion. All of these things need to get priced into the stock, and they're not quite there yet.
So that's the question: was 2 years long enough to get it priced into the stock? And
No way.
I don't think that
No,
it is.
not at all.
And like
4 isn't either.
People still remember, or people still believe the miscarriage is the same as an abortion. People are being denied this. Women are dying. I do think that with time, and I would say even in 2 years or 4 years, that the world didn't end the next day factor is totally settled in. And so, you know how everything's like, I had a college buddy one time, and I was like way into politics, and he just wasn't. And he's like, he said, if John Kerry wins or Bush wins, it's not going to affect my life either way. And I think he like voted for Bush because he was from Texas, and he's from Texas. You know, it was just like totally superficial. And I remember thinking about that. And at the time we were, how old was I? I don't know, 21, 22. I remember thinking, that's kind of true. Like as a young person, like is my day-to-day life going to be impacted by John Kerry or George W. Bush? And of course, at the time it was all, well, when you're drafted and sent to Iraq, it'll affect you. But besides that, which obviously didn't happen, that's going to come into play with, okay, yeah, in 2022, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. 2 years later, 4 years later, 6 years later, 8 years later, like, my life wasn't really affected by that.
It's an open book right now, right? Everything's up for grabs. We're going to see what the next 2, 4, 10 years have in store for us. And while I think that the passage of time will kind of soften the backlash against Roe v. Wade as people realize, as you said, the world hasn't ended, it's up to us to continue making the case to each other, to the voters, to politicians. And I think this could go 2 different ways. You could see it where in 10 years, as you've noted before, maybe without Roe, the Democrats don't feel like they have to support abortion. They've got the freedom to be pro-life. It could go in a different direction. I think the worst case scenario that we could see politically is that we turn into a place like Canada or the UK, where you've got one party that is abortion extremism, and you've got another party that says, well, we're not going to touch the abortion issue. That's the real danger, I think, is that the Republicans just decide we're going to become a relatively fiscally conservative policy organization and not touch the social issues, the same way we've seen them essentially throw in the towel on marriage and now on drugs.
Yeah, marriage and drugs are a good argument for that, but abortion's different. Abortion's different because now you're basically going to lose the conservative Catholic and the evangelical vote. And that's still, now in 10 years, it may be different, but they have to have that.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you've said historically, don't make the comparison of America to Canada or America to the UK because we're just different. We're more Christian. We've got a deeper faith history. I mean, I can't say we're deeper faith history than Europe, but at this point in time, there's not a lot of practicing Christians in Europe, and there still are here, so it's different. But I don't know. You look at most of the rest of the world, and they just kind of, you get a nominally conservative party versus a hardline leftist party, and
yeah, okay. So
there's never any shifting toward the right. The shifting is all slow or fast to the left.
This is the viewer now witnessing Sean cheering up Steve. Because usually, but to be fair, I know we love the pro-life movement in Canada. I just spoke at their March for Life a few months ago, but that is our pro-life movement in size and scope is like the New York Yankees in the late 90s. And in these other countries, it's like a little league team because they just don't have the conviction sometimes. They don't have the funding. They don't have the organization. And I think the difference would be the pro-life movement. And Trump's a good example of that. He comes out and he says he's going to vote yes for the Florida thing, and he gets hammered. And in less than 24 hours, he flips it. And that is funny because he doesn't listen to anybody on anything except he's always listened to pro-lifers. I mean, which saved him in 2016 if he wanted to win that vote because Scalia died and Leonard Leo said, "Here's your list and nominate these people," and he did it. And he, and you got to do the Mexico City policy. He did it. He did everything the pro-life movement asked him to do. And then now that he's kind of compromising, he gets hammered every couple of months, and he kind of corrects it. So that's the irony. But the pro-life movement, to me, in America would be the difference. I think you're also forgetting something that didn't exist. Now I feel like I'm Steving you.
I see a glint in your eyes. I'm ready for this.
You do this to me. You do this to me where you point something out. I'm like, dang, I didn't even think of that, Steve. So smart. And now I'm going to show you how smart I am. We didn't. So like 2000, take gay marriage, even though I think the comparison's terrible because if your daughter has... If you raise a bunch of kids, you're Catholic, you're Baptist, and your daughter has an abortion, you never know that, as we know. Very rarely. But if your son's gay, you know about it, and you instantly defend that. You meet the partner, you do all that. It's wrong. Okay, he's born like this. I didn't do anything wrong. The gay thing is way different because you can come out, you can ask priests and you can ask preachers. You can come out and you can preach about abortion. You can preach about, heck, you could do in vitro. You could give a little logical argument. But if you touch two things, you're going to get killed. Divorce and homosexuality. And that is just different than abortion because a lot of people have been pregnant and had babies, and we have ultrasounds and we have pictures, and the scientific development it's gone the opposite way of homosexuality. We've gotten more convicted in our pro-life stance because of technology, whereas over time, everybody's loosened up on homosexuals because they're related to one or they have a friend and they don't. It's just different. The other thing, the reason I had the sparkle in my eye is you are underestimating the whole political shift and it just going dark. What we didn't have 15 or 20 years ago is non-mainstream conservative media. We didn't have Am I a Racist or What is a Woman? We didn't have, now people get upset, we didn't have Joe Rogan, who's like the biggest voice, in media. And the guy just hammers our government all day long and supports Elon Musk and, points out the COVID stuff. And he's crazy on some stuff and, probably a drug addict. But, it's just one of those things where that didn't exist. That's very different from 2008.
Yeah, it's a fair point. And I want to be clear. I'm not saying we are destined to go down the Canadian
you're basically looking at the stock market the last 50 years. And there's a lot of people that are like, the market dropped today or, and when you look at the 50 years, we could end up like Canada. But I'm saying the whole Daily Wire, Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, Elon
40
Musk,
Days for Life podcast.
40 Days for Life podcast. I mean, that just didn't exist in 2008. And the media elected Obama. Mm-hmm. The media elected Bill Clinton. And that mainstream media, Fox News elected Trump, there's no doubt, in 2016. And that's just... Who's watching that? For now, especially, but 4 more years, 8 more years. I just think that's going to change. To
your point, that's why I think there's such an emphasis on censorship now. Did you ever think you would see the Democrats who look at Vietnam, free speech, free speech, free speech, and now they're the ones. Well, you don't really necessarily have a universal right to freedom of speech if you're gonna spread misinformation,
misinformation,
and disinformation.
Disinformation.
Dun dun
It's
dun.
it's when Jerry Seinfeld asked Newman, why he was a mailman, and he said, because when you control the mail, you control information. So that's the
Newman.
So I have a little gleam in my eye too, because I'm thinking about this.
Let's gang up on
and
Steve.
I know,
Come on.
right? No, I want
ready.
to pose this question. I'm thinking about like the parallel between slavery and abortion, and think about how long slavery existed, and then you think about how long we had legal abortion here. And I know this is going to sound awful, but did we have Roe long enough? Because then you were talking too about how people don't like change. So for all of existence, right, we didn't have legal abortion. And then suddenly 1973, we have legal abortion.
Mm-hmm.
But it really didn't last very long if you think about it.
Right.
It's 52 years later, they overturned Roe.
49, 50?
Was it 49? Okay.
And a half.
Gosh, what year is this? 2024. Okay.
That's right.
So it's like, so it in the grand scheme of things, and you look at history, we didn't really have legalized abortion for very long. So I'm wondering how much of that contributes to politicians' inability to actually argue the pro-life stance, because they've used this as a political tool for so long, and then now it's like, whoa, this has been overturned. With slavery, I think there was really strong convictions there, and people were willing to go to war, right? Mm-hmm. And now I think people are just scrambling because because if you think about it, a lot of Americans they don't even know that abortion was legal through all 9 months of pregnancy. Like, we've had legalized abortion for almost 50 years, and the average person didn't even know that. So it kind of makes sense to me why these politicians don't know how to defend the pro-life stance, and then also why they just kind of like skirt from it. Like they don't know what to say. They don't know what to do.
And an abortion doesn't affect your daily life like slavery did.
Right.
And this is why I'm not on the we're going to have a civil war bandwagon. Mm-hmm. I think those people are crazy. First off, geographically, it's not going to happen. Also, we don't want that. Americans
We're
don't.
not organized geographically. Like, no. We don't have this line drawn across.
We don't. We all live around each other. What are you going to do? And by the way, the U.S. government is the most powerful government and military, whether you are proud of that or not, in the history of the world. Okay, so you're not going to have some like general defect from the army and be like, I'm representing. It's.
What if you waged the Civil War from a sloped roof?
See. They're listening to us. Raid Steve's house. No, it's not that. It's that if you had a plantation in Alabama, you had nothing in common with somebody who lives in some little stuffed, nasty apartment in Boston. Culturally, your lifestyle is so different. It's a foreign thing. And the same if you work in an industry in New York and, you just can't relate to some farmer in Tennessee, okay? There was a cultural divide and all of that. But with abortion, a lot of people are like, it just doesn't affect my life. But slavery affected everybody's daily life. The conviction was a lot. Your economy is going to collapse. In fact, most people are the pro-slavery Northerners were like, what are we going to do? Like, this is free labor. It's wrong. I'm sorry, and blah, blah, blah. But This is the system. This is like, it literally is running our entire economy. And most people were worried that the economy would collapse. And there was a lot done, to prevent that. But that impacts everybody. Okay. And abortion isn't like that.
It doesn't impact you until it impacts you. Like, abortion doesn't affect you until it affects you. And, I had somebody very close to me who said to me with tears in her eyes, I have always admired what you do. I just didn't understand why you do it until now. And that really struck me, because, this person who is very dear to me, obviously had a situation and a circumstance where abortion was going to impact her greatly. And so she understood, because people, again, they don't really think about it. If it's not, they go about their day, it doesn't have any impact on them. It's kind of like just this, this issue, this political issue, and they may have like their personal stance and their personal belief, but they don't really think it's the end of the world, that sort of thing if Roe's overturned. And then they experience it in their personal lives. And then, so this was this moment where she said, now I understand why you do what you do.
And it's pivotal. And it's pivotal. But the difference is that the slaves were responsible for cotton and food and some obviously like supplies and lumber and all that, timber. But if a woman goes and has an abortion, that's not going to prevent me from getting clothes or food.
Right.
But if we free all the slaves, I may not have clothes or food. Well, you better sign up and fight them. And that's the difference. And this is also like an educational thing of, we're having to educate people on the fact that killing, 1 million babies a year actually does impact them. And, and obviously it's what it says about us. And that is what the North did a great job of, was getting away from like the working conditions of the slaves and all this to the bigger moral argument that America is not a free country if we have slavery, and we can just no longer sleep at night knowing that there's slavery. And Lincoln gets criticized because they're like, well, then he had to appeal to morality because he really wasn't convicted. I think he was, whether he was or he wasn't, he did appeal to God and morality, and the abolitionists were already on that kick. And that worked, and that was required. And I hope to God that I never get away from the moral argument against abortion being the strongest, that we are this is an evil thing in our country, and we'll never be righteous as long as we have it.
When it comes to the whole political trajectory, I think my big point, I was kind of sharing like what's the worst case scenario. I think it's important for everybody.
Which you did a great job of doing.
I think it's important for everybody to recognize that this is up for grabs. I think that we live in a country where progressivism is so baked into so many things that there's this idea that history moves one way. If you're not with it, you're on the wrong side of history, so you better get out of the way or you're going to get bulldozed. And it's sort of this steady, linear, progressive march toward marriage equality and gender equality and women's equality, which means abortion, all those sorts of things. The idea is that it can only go one way. And I think sometimes even as Christians and as pro-lifers, we get swept up in that too. Like Roe v. Wade is overturned, and now it's only a matter of time. We're going to end abortion state by state, and in 5, maybe 10 years, everybody will live happily ever after. And it's just not that simple. It's messy. We've got to fight this out. We've got to be a voice to the politicians. The civil rights movement of the 60s, LBJ was not eager to go sign a bunch of civil rights acts.
No.
He was dragged kicking and screaming across the finish line by a culture that led. Politics is downstream from culture. Easy to say. So what do? We go out and we pray and we fast and we do community outreach and we stand vigil in front of abortion facilities, and we don't let this issue go away as much as people in both parties might like it to.
Yeah. And, again, when we recap 2022, it's absurd that DeSantis won by 19 points. Months after Roe was overturned. He owned the pro-life issue. The same with Abbott, who had a lot of money from his opponent coming in. He won handedly. And we mentioned, Governor Kemp, which he fought a lot. He had a lot of issues going on in Georgia. It just wasn't abortion because he was the super pro-life governor. He still had like Trump after him for all the election stuff in 2020. So
he won, whereas Herschel Walker could not. So it wasn't just like there's a built-in advantage. People made a decision which way they were going to go. And I think it's important to ask, why did these governors win? I don't know that you can say it was because of their pro-life stance, but what I think you can say is DeSantis, they had a Hurricane Ian, and he managed it well. And he built the roads back and the bridges back sooner than they expected to be. And so people said, hey, this is actually what government is for, isn't it? To make sure that we have the roads that can get us to work and rebuild after the hurricane. And so competence matters. I think this is where I think Trump gets too bogged down in relitigating old grievances over old elections. People don't want drama. There was a line that was uttered in reference to the 2022 election where the Democrats overperformed, and that line was boring wins. Maybe rebuilding a bridge after a hurricane is boring, but that's what gets you the candidate who signs the heartbeat bill in Florida and who takes an active leadership role on opposing Amendment 4 to constitutionalize abortion in that state. We just need competent and boring, if you will, governance, and the pro-life can ride along with it.
And integrity is important to people, too. Integrity is important. So, like, when you have a view and you stand by it, I think people appreciate that even if they disagree with it.
That's AOC. I respect AOC because she believes this, which is scary. But at least she's not a phony. I don't think you can accuse her of being a phony. Bernie Sanders isn't a phony. Just like Mike Huckabee was not a phony. Now, he couldn't get elected president. I think he'd have been a great president. But
Rick Santorum,
Mike Pence. And they can say whatever they want, but like those people aren't phonies.
Mentioned Mike Pence. We're going to get in trouble now.
You mention anybody, we're going to get in trouble no matter what.
We're going to get feedback on this podcast from people who say we were too pro-Trump and too anti-Trump on the same podcast.
And we'll end with this on the pro-Trump, anti-Trump. Whether you love Trump or you hate Trump, I think Democrats, Republicans, my liberal, crazy, Trump's evil friends and relatives all agree, and I think we all agree, this is the only thing we agree on, Trump can lose this campaign. She can't win it. You can't just not go through the process and get rid of the old guy and put her in. You could with like a talented, well-spoken person, which she's not.
She's not doing interviews.
She's not doing interviews.
Not just did she not get nominated, she didn't do any interviews.
It is Trump's to lose, which he is very capable of losing. And I think no matter what, both sides, if she wins, they're like, yeah, he blew it. I mean, there's been 1 million comments that Trump has made that you see conservatives, like they'll post, this is exactly why they wanted him to be the candidate. And there's a lot of truth to whichever party gets rid of their 80-year-old first wins. and we're going to see how that plays out, and of course we don't know, and we don't know what's happened, but it's amazing when you look at what I think he's run a very, very bad campaign. But what do I know? He may win in a landslide again. So, I thought he would get elected in 2016. I was told I was nuts. And now I think, he's running a terrible campaign. So I can prove to be totally dumb. But the guy got shot twice as of the recording of this podcast. And he's like the perfect victim. He gave that picture of the American flag and the blood coming out. You can't pay for that. You can't orchestrate that any better. They had a great convention that everybody said was the best convention ever. His talk was the worst. It should have ended at 25 minutes. But despite that, it's like neck and neck. I mean, we love victims. The person who gets beat up, the person who gets shot, the martyr, all of that, it just doesn't apply to him. It's like nobody in the history of the world. And that's why I think most people agree. You kind of know what you're getting with Trump, and you don't know what you're getting with her. And so if he loses, it's because he lost it.
Right.
It's because he lost it. So any closing comments on that uplifting thought?
I just add.
Do you agree with that, by the way?
Yeah,
Like if he were running against Michelle Obama, I'm like, she's going to kill him. She'll crush him. Like he would get beat, right? It didn't matter, what he did. But I think the Obamas would run a great campaign. Kamala's just not.
My dad's take on this, I was like, I didn't understand why the primary wasn't more competitive. You've got DeSantis, you've just got like a strong lineup of candidates going up against Trump. I was like, I didn't understand why he just walked in so uncompetitively. And my dad said when he was president, everybody was rich and happy. That should count for something for him, but he doesn't seem to be capitalizing on it.
And if he wins in a landslide, or he wins, period, that'll be the reason. Mm-hmm. It's the economy. Everything else was a lot of this stuff, abortion and all this stuff. It was like, no. And I do think, which he's up the ante on, but I think people are like, hey, Russia has nukes. Like, we're ready to be out of wars for a long time. And you have the timing of the Afghanistan debacle, and like that's like our generation, like our friends that went over and fought. And I have family and friends that were SEALs, and they're just like, well, that was a big waste of 20 years of my life, you know? And that's to have that happen of like, unless somebody's invading North Carolina, we're good. Mm-hmm. Like, no more wars. And then to get involved in Ukraine, and now you've got the Middle East, you're like, okay, he's crazy and he's a jerk. But when he says, I'll have this stopped in an hour, everybody's like, he probably will. Right. Because he's crazy. And, and we had total peace and serenity. Aside from his rhetoric, nobody was messing with the United States when he was president.
Right now, you could honestly say nobody's really entirely sure whether we are or are not in the opening stages of World War III, and that wasn't really a question during his presidency.
That wasn't, and if you said that, you were like crazy as a candidate in previous elections. You're like, we're not on the brink of World War III. But it's different now because Russia has nukes and the world's just so destabilized. But yeah, if he wins, it's going to be because of what your dad said, and if he loses, it's going to be because of some of the stuff that we've covered, which is he ran a terrible campaign. He was all over the map. He hurt his own voter turnout, and on and on and on. So.
Well, Americans had 8 years of Obama and high gas prices and, struggling during that time. And then Trump comes in and everything seems to like be good again, right?
Yeah.
And then we come back to Biden and Harris, and then we're, people are struggling to make ends meet. And I'm just like, how short of a memory people have that they don't remember things were good under Trump, right? And it's like they've forgotten that.
It's George Floyd and COVID.
Yeah.
And that was my question. By the way, do you ever sit up at night and you're like, like you don't think about, I want to be the quarterback of the Green Bay Packers. You're like, I would have been an awesome political consultant.
Oh, yeah. When I grew up, I was very involved in politics as a teenager. I was running around with the Bush campaign throughout high school. I never wanted to be president. I wanted to be Karl Rove.
Yeah, I can see that. And you're so good with this stuff, and I'm glad you're at 40 Days for Life. He announces, I hired Steve. I coached him from 40 Days for Life. You get your own plane. They don't have that in the pro-life movement. You get a plane. It's going to be very classy. You're very smart. You're very smart. But, okay, so last thing, and then we'll wrap up. With what Ramona said, because I do think it was a bad ending with Trump and the COVID, and he does what I guess he's supposed to do, which is we got hit with the virus and then we rebuilt. All that's true when you go back, but if the election were like January 31st of 2020, I think he would have won in a landslide because of the economy and everything, and the whole like chaos and everything. It really hurt him, and COVID really hurt him. And I thought that the Democrats did a brilliant job of just basically blaming him for the riots and the virus. And remember, Fauci was still popular in 2020. Now everybody thinks he's like a criminal, but he was still popular, and it was like science versus Trump, and like, yeah, he's kind of crazy, and we got to get out of this. It was the mayhem helped Biden.
Yeah, and he didn't help himself either. That I think there's any number of different things. Any one of like half a dozen or more different things would have shifted it. No COVID, he wins. No George Floyd, he wins. If he acts like a human being in that first debate against Biden, he wins.
So the question is, now that we're post-COVID and we don't care, is this like the January 31st, 2020 election? Or have people forgotten about what Ramona said about Trump's 4 years being good for the economy?
I don't know. There's still the chaos factor. I think people are tired, and I think the indictments against Trump are nonsense. But I think there's just a little bit in the background of like, I want this anymore. I don't want the impeachments. I'm not saying I think that's fair. I don't think it's all fair. I do think it's partially fair. But there's just boring wins, and we don't have boring right now.
Yeah, boring wins, and also this is a problem. We've talked about this with just the media in general of presidents and popes, where we didn't really know this was going on 80 years ago. Like, the drama of the government shouldn't really exist. It's because of the media.
In a healthy country, we would not care that much who's the president because it would be exactly like you said, Bush, Kerry doesn't really affect my life that much. Now it does, and it shouldn't.
Now it does, and it shouldn't, because they've invaded our lives on so many different things. So, okay, that was great. Thank you, political consultant Steve. We'll have to do a little Karl Rove thing. Okay, so... if you have not gotten it already, obviously go vote. We want to encourage people to vote. But if you have not gotten What to Say When To, we highly encourage you to get it, because pre and especially, I think, post-election, no matter who wins, abortion is going to be on fire as an issue. And then, of course, a couple of weeks after the election, if we even know who won, we will have Thanksgiving, where everybody gets along and nothing controversial comes up. So be sure to go and get your signed copy from What to Say When Part 2 directly from 40 Days for Life on our store website. You'll get a signed copy. And if you have already read it and you enjoyed it, please go to Amazon, rate, review, and share it. It helps all pro-life books. So thank you, Steve. Thank you, Ramona. And we will see you next time. God bless you.